this clip that they have goes viral, and in it she's talking about her own awakening to the reality of the fraud of the American Revolution. And she talks about how it's only been since she has found herself in certain Anglican churches being taught by certain Anglican priests that advised her to study this figure, Nicholas Hagger, and specifically the Secret Founding of America book, which I found so provocative that I decided to buy myself a copy. And I've read it, and I'm going to write something on it sooner than later, but I have to do more work because it was more sophisticated than I realized when I read it, because Nicholas Hagger is kind of like, remember we were talking about, Wasserman, and we're talking about Francis Yates. He's kind of like that as far as the caliber of his assignment to create the new narratives that acknowledge what is usually not permitted to be acknowledged about our deep history, especially the role of Freemasonic societies and the occult. So he's supposed to acknowledge it, but then retool it in such a manner that still benefits the oligarchy at the end of the day and destroys our ability to think about causation. So that's the purpose. So there's a lot. He doesn't footnote, first of all. Just to be clear, there's like hardly any footnotes. There's maybe 72 or something in the whole book, which is already like, kind of, if you're not willing to like put yourself out there and say where some of your claims are coming from, you're not willing to be held accountable. That's already a bit of a red alarm. But anyway, there's still a lot of really, really useful things in this book. And Candace Owens is pretty much saying how she realized that the American Revolution was a Freemasonic fraud designed to run a Luciferian overthrow of the Christian divine right of king system of the British Empire, which she's saying the world was better when we had divine rights of kings managing the world instead of these fake Illuminati-run republics. And so that's the narrative. And I'm like, whoa, that's weird that you're doing this. So my first question was, before I even read the book, I was like, who's Nicholas Hagger? So I did the Wikipedia search, and I'm like just reading his bio, and I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Well, there he is right there. So he's old, he's 86, and he's been around, and you read his bio, and this guy's clearly, he's got a whole section on his espionage career where he was assigned to spy on Gaddafi. He was assigned to also oversee counterintelligence operations against black nationalist movements, which would have tied him into the sort of, African British run MK Ultra style operations that would have been driven by South Africa and Belgium and Britain and France in the 1960s and 70s, killing pretty much anybody who had a tendency towards becoming a leader to rally the people to freedom. He was always working closely with MI5 and MI6. He was the personal tutor to Emperor, one of the sons of Emperor Hirohito, whose name I'm forgetting. So he's the personal. He was assigned to be the personal tutor of. That's it, Hitachi, Prince Hitachi of Japan. So he's pretty high up there, and he wrote a lot of books touching on a variety of topics. And this particular one, I had to read it. So basically, he's acknowledging useful things. So I remember when I mentioned that Frederick V and Elizabeth Stuart, after the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, which is a bloodbath, they ran off and found sanctuary in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
They did, when they arrived, it was just a few months after the movement of English colonization via the Netherlands had begun, because the King Charles I, who later gets his head cut off he's a Stuart king, he's doing some pretty big clampdowns on religious freedom, and it's becoming very suffocating for people who are not following a certain party line to just be themselves and to follow their conscience. So they're like, you got movements of Puritans and other groups that are fleeing England. Netherlands is providing safe haven to a lot of these people, and that becomes the beachhead by which you have a lot of ships that end up setting sail to the New World. So he's acknowledging certain truths that tie us into the story of he doesn't talk about the 30 Years' War, but he does talk about the Rosicrucian movements. But then what he does is he acknowledges this battle that broke out in Massachusetts between, on the one hand, you had John Winthrop Jr. and what I know, because of my research, I know that this battle led by John Winthrop Jr. was a Platonic Augustinian movement, though they were operating within the Puritan sort of banner. They themselves were situated epistemologically, philosophically, culturally within the Augustinian tradition, which is the Platonic Christian tradition, which has always been the only thing which has resisted successfully this evil parasite. All of the other like splinter groups that branch off calling themselves Christian tend to always just be typically different flavors of the same evil in controlled dialectics. So the Augustinian tradition, it's more than just a faction. It could express itself. It's a way of thinking about God, yourself, creation, and how we should comport ourselves to make things better for humanity now and into the future. So it's just this other philosophy, let's just say that. Now I'm saying this because they were at battle with an occult network. It was called the Antinomian controversy. Now Hagger touches upon it ever so briefly, but the Antinomian controversy, again, people can Google it. It's the first major existential threat in the new colony of Massachusetts between two different factions. One, the Mather, the Winthrop faction, and the other being the followers of the hard occult witch covens, who are expressing themselves in the figure of Annie Hutchison, who's I mean, there's no smoking gun that says she's a witch, but when you look at the Free Grace Antinomian movement that she's leading, that professes to make the Bible irrelevant by virtue of initiates getting divine revelation that allow them to sort of create their new scripture. It's the same type of formula that was behind the growth of the Gnostics, 1,500 years earlier, that battled the early Christian church, was the Gnostics. The idea was if you go through your rites of initiation, you can become literally perfect, completely without sin. And because of that, you have direct experience of God. As such, you can channel that divine message of the angels and whatever through you. And then that becomes the foundation of new cults, new gurus building new cults that, and the guru is always above right and wrong, above good and evil. And that's the sort of thing that was spreading. And one of the attractive elements of it is it's usually premised around what makes these free grace movements attractive is that, number one, there's usually some overly heavy-handed Jesuitical kind of like behavior for the established order that makes the established order look very unpalatable. People don't, they see it as hypocritical. They see it as suffocating. There's that aspect that tends to be one element of the formula, but the other one is it's often accompanied by the promise of the justification of a lot of hedonism. So all of a sudden, the body becomes more sacred than it should be. The fleshly pleasures becomes an act all of a sudden, not of shame, but of a sacred journey towards God. Drugs, psychedelic drugs, which were active in those days too. It's like mushrooms and ergot and other things. It's not a new thing that came out of the CIA and MK Ultra in the 20th century. It's been around for thousands of years. It's just that it went big at that time in the 20th century, but it was a big part of the initiatory processes too, which is it could be scary, it could be fun. You're seeing like spirits and demons and shadows, and you're tripping out pretty much, right? And under the control of certain stories that you're told in your initiation that are the same stories told to everybody, you can have common dreams, you can have common hallucinations based upon what your imagination has been wired to mentate over, right? To fictionalize over in your mind, so that when you've had the shared dreaming, because of the shared stories, because of the shared tales, now all of a sudden you have similar shared hallucinogenic trips, which also, because it's shared, reconfirms in people that, oh, they must be seeing the same demon. That's then reinterpreted for them by a higher priest or priestess that tells them what they experienced. So there's a common sort of script that's generally followed for these processes. Now, all that to say, Annie Hutchison is running one of these things, and she's being her patron is Sir Henry Vale, and Sir Henry Vale is the first governor. He's a British governor of Massachusetts, an enemy of John Winthrop Jr., and he's providing protection to John Wheelwright, I think the brother-in-law of Annie Hutchison. And there's a war and this Antinomianist controversy goes on for a couple of years. Finally, the Augustinian faction under Winthrop is successful. They expel Annie Hutchinson and Wheelwright, and these guys basically go off and they found a new colony. And the colony is two new colonies. They found Rhode Island, Providence, and then they found New Hampshire. So that's founded by these occult antinomianists who are setting up this new thing. Sir Henry Vale ends up giving up. He's exasperated and his plans fail, and he ends up going back to England to advise. He ends up becoming a knight in England by Charles II, who he later throws under the bus in the phoenixing operation that becomes the English Civil War in 1649. Charles II Stuart gets his head lopped off, and there's a potential in England for a new renaissance. There's some really good people in the Republican movement in England, but they're overshadowed, and they basically are not victorious at staying in power. And unfortunately, this Rosicrucian movement around Henry Vale ends up becoming the advisors to Oliver Cromwell, who ends up making a mess of things on so many levels. But the whole thing was probably unworkable. I don't think it could have necessarily worked. There's just too many scrambled eggs everywhere. But so Massachusetts ends up surviving those fires, and it ends up founding the basis of what becomes the core Republican movement. Now, Nicholas Hagger, he's flipping everything inside out. So he's talking about a lot of the elements that I'm talking about, but he'll flip things around to make those people whom I know are playing a positive role appear to be the evil ones, and the people who are doing the evil thing, he makes them appear to be the underdog heroes. So he acknowledges the different factions of Freemasonry, but it's where he puts the emphasis. And so it does its job of convincing many people who read that book, because it was published in 1987 or something for the first time. It's been republished so many times in different languages, including Candace Owens, who's become now a convert to the aristocratic reinterpretation through her initiation into the high bloodlines of the House of Lords of England, and these chivalric networks, these orders that permeate the Anglican Church, that was co-created with the Jesuits, by the way. The Anglicans and the Jesuits are also two sides, a feminine, masculine path of one thing. They just take on different roles at different times, but they were created in the same year by the same operators from Venice. So just to say, it's the same thing. Now that's what she got absorbed into. So she's playing a certain role, whether she knows it or not. I think she's a smart girl. She's got a lot of charisma and a lot of wits. I doubt she fully understands what the game is that she's playing a role in as a part of the game board. But it's clear what it is when you approach it top down, as far as the move to affect the new phase of this Templar revenge, which involves eliminating, getting the Jews to become Zionists, or as many of them to become Zionist, that don't even understand how they're being used and inflamed with their own sense of chosen people, blood and soil cultishness, in order to then be the triggers of their own annihilation, and ultimately the justification for reinstating Templar, Crusader control over a new kingdom of Jerusalem that Pete Hegseth and company are so committed to restoring as part of some new religious ritual for a new age that they want to invoke through the fires of a phoenix, which is why you have even people like certain Weinstein brothers out there doing sermons basically on the importance of phoenixing the republic, phoenixing the world. So I won't go into more names. I could name a lot more names of influencers who are all invoking the same phoenixing language, including Nicholas Hagger over there. So it's, when you know this history, you got a lot more to sort of like cut through some of the misinformation. If you don't, it's easy to get sucked into a lot of it. It's admittedly not easy.